The wind atop the abandoned clock tower in Upper Flagley didn't just bite, it gnawed at the bone. But Elara Vance could not afford to shiver. Through the freezing sleet, nearly 800 yards away, 3 dark streaks tore across the grey sky on broomsticks, diving toward a convoy of magical refugees that had stalled in the mud. Elara had exactly 4 seconds before the lead Death Eater reached optimum casting range for a blasting curse that would turn the lead wagon and the 12 children inside it into splinters. Standard dueling doctrine said she was useless here because a stupefied charm dissipates after 50 yards and loses all accuracy after 80. So technically, Elara was unarmed against a threat half a mile away. But Elara wasn't following doctrine, she was following the math. She adjusted the heavy brass dial clamped awkwardly to the base of her hawthorn wand, squinted through the cracked glass of a modified omniocular lens duct-taped to the shaft, and whispered a spell that sounded more like a coordinate than an incantation. The tip of her wand didn't spark. It hummed with a low, dangerous vibration that made her teeth ache. She didn't fire where the Death Eater was. She fired at the empty air 300 feet in front of him, accounting for the 30-mile-per-hour crosswind and the drag coefficient of a heavy woolen cloak. 1, 2, 3. A singular beam of condensed red light shot across the valley, silent and impossibly fast, covering the distance in a heartbeat. It struck the lead broomstick rider squarely in the chest, knocking him unconscious before he even heard the sound of the cast. He plummeted silently into the tree line. 2 enemies left. The convoy was still exposed. If you want to know how this forgotten witch turned a useless piece of junk into Hogwarts' most lethal defense, stay with me until the end of this story. Elara Vance was never supposed to be a war hero. In fact, she was the kind of witch people usually forgot was in the room. A Hufflepuff with a nervous stutter and a reputation for freezing up during defense against the dark arts, she had been rejected from the Auror training program twice. Not because she lacked power, but because she lacked speed. In a duel where reaction time is everything, Elara was a liability. She thought too much. She calculated angles while others were already casting shields. So when the Second Wizarding War broke out, the Order of the Phoenix assigned her to the only job they thought she couldn't mess up: remote lookout duty. She was supposed to sit on cold rooftops and send sparks if she saw trouble, then run away. But Elara watched the battles from above and realized something terrifying. The Death Eaters were winning because they didn't play fair. They attacked from the air, from outside the range of defensive wards, and they picked off Aurors who were too busy dueling close quarters to look up. She began tinkering in the drafty attic of a safe house near Leeds. Her invention was hideous to look at. A cluster of brass weights, arithmetic charts, and telescopic lenses scavenged from broken Quidditch gear, all clamped onto her wand with dragon hide straps. Her peers laughed at it. One senior order member called it Vance's folly, telling her that magic wasn't about math, it was about intent. and that trying to snipe a wizard from a hilltop was a coward's game. They stopped laughing 3 weeks later, when a werewolf pack was decimated before they even reached the perimeter of a safe house, struck down by spells fired from a church tower a mile away. Back in Upper Flagley, the element of surprise was gone. The 2 remaining Death Eaters had pulled out of their dive, banking hard left and scattering into the cloud cover. They knew the angle of the first shot, and they knew where she was. This was the problem with the sniper charm. It left a visible trail of ionized magic through the air, a straight line pointing right back to her hiding spot. Ilara scrambled backward, her boots slipping on the icy slate tiles of the clock tower. She had to move. She dragged her heavy kit bag behind her, the brass weights on her wand clinking softly. She had 3 spells left in her current magical core reserve before exhaustion set in. The sniper charm demanded a massive amount of focus and raw power, compressing a standard stunner into a dense bolt capable of traveling enormous distances without fading. It was like holding a held breath that burned your lungs. She tucked herself behind a crumbling gargoyle, just as a green jet of light obliterated the spot where she had been standing, sending stone shrapnel slicing through her robes. They were hunting her now. The convoy below was frantically trying to get the wheels of the lead wagon unstuck from the mud, but they needed 2 minutes. Ilara had to buy them those 2 minutes against 2 aerial combatants who were closing the distance fast. She peeked around the stone. One attacker was circling high, attempting to drop curses vertically. The other was coming in low, skimming the rooftops, trying to flank her. Ilara made a choice, a tactical error born of desperation. She ignored the high flyer and swung her heavy brass-sighted wand toward the low attacker. She didn't account for the thermal updraft from the chimneys. She fired. The red beam hissed through the air, missing the Death Eater's shoulder by inches. He saw the flash. He laughed, a magically amplified sound that boomed over the rooftops. "Missed me, little bird," he shouted. He leveled his wand at her, his face visible now behind the mask. He was less than 200 yards away, too close for her scope, but too far for a normal duel. She was caught in the dead zone. Ilara froze, the familiar panic rising in her throat. This was why she failed her exams. This was why she was just a lookout. If this forgotten legend of Hogwarts is already touching your heart, and you would like to help keep these stories alive, you can support the channel by clicking the thanks button below the video. Every little bit helps me continue bringing you more hidden tales of courage and magic. The Death Eater fired a blasting curse. It hit the base of the gargoyle, blowing the stone legs out from under it. The heavy statue collapsed, pinning Ilara's left leg against the roof. Pain blinded her, white and hot. She screamed, but the sound was lost in the wind. She couldn't move. Her leg was crushed. The Death Eater slowed his broom, hovering like a vulture, enjoying the moment. He raised his wand for the kill. But Ilara Vance didn't look at her leg. She looked at the brass dial on her wand. It was bent. The lens was cracked. The delicate arithmancy calibration she had spent months perfecting was ruined. She had one shot left and no way to aim it. She closed her eyes. For 11 months she had relied on the tools, the math, the brass, the lenses. She hid behind the mechanics because she didn't trust her own instincts. But the math wasn't the magic. The math was just the language. She was the magic. The Death Eater shouted, "Avada Kedavra!" Elara didn't calculate the wind speed. She didn't check the distance. She felt the air. She felt the ozone of his curse rushing toward her. She felt the heartbeat of the terrified children in the wagon half a mile below. She snapped her eyes open and screamed an incantation that wasn't in any book, a spell she had modified night after night in the cold. She didn't fire a beam, she fired a pulse. She whipped her wand in a violently short arc, not at the Death Eater, but at the slate tiles directly in front of his broom. The sniper spell hit the roof instantly, overloading the stone with kinetic energy. The explosion wasn't fire, it was pure force. A shockwave of shattered slate and magical pressure erupted upward like a geyser. The Death Eater's killing curse was knocked off course, flying harmlessly into the clouds. The shockwave caught his broomstick, snapping the tail twigs and flipping him backward into a chaotic spin. He crashed hard onto the roof, rolling down the slope and falling into the alley below. One left, the High Flyer. Elara dragged herself free from the gargoyle, her leg dragging uselessly behind her, leaving a streak of red on the white frost. She was losing consciousness. The High Flyer was diving now, seeing his partner fall. He was coming in a straight vertical line, a maneuver that made him a small target, but gave him incredible speed. He was a bullet dropping from the sky. Elara leaned back against the chimney. She couldn't lift the heavy wand anymore. Her hand was trembling too much. The brass sight was useless. She placed the wand on her knee, using her injury as a mount. She watched the black speck growing larger. 500 yards. 400. She waited. 300. The air pressure around her began to drop as the Death Eater gathered magic for a final impact. 200. Elara realized something. He was moving so fast that he couldn't change course. He was committed to the dive. She didn't need to find him. He was bringing the target to her. She twisted the broken dial on her wand all the way to the right, unlocking the safety limiter. This would destroy the wand. It might destroy her hand. It was the ridiculous feature she had added for emergencies, a magical capacitor that dumped all remaining core energy in a single wide dispersion shot, a shotgun blast instead of a sniper bullet. 100 yards. She could see the whites of his eyes through the mask slits. Elara squeezed the handle. Expulso maxima! The recoil dislocated her shoulder. The tip of her hawthorn wand exploded into dust. A cone of blue-white light erupted from the roof, engulfing the diving Death Eater entirely. There was no finesse, no calculation, just raw, undeniable power. The force of the spell met the momentum of the dive. The Death Eater didn't just stop, he was repelled backward with such violence that the sonic boom shattered every window in the square below. He was thrown back up into the clouds, unconscious, before he even reached the apex of his ascent. Silence fell over Upper Flagley. Elara lay back on the freezing tiles, looking up at the grey sky. Her wand was a splintered stick. Her leg was broken, but down in the valley she heard the crack of a whip and the rumble of wheels. The wagon was moving. They were safe. That was number 309. She was found 3 hours later by a retrieval team, half frozen and barely breathing. They didn't understand what had happened. They saw the broken gargoyle, the shattered windows, and the unconscious Death Eaters in the alley and the field. They looked at the shivering girl with the broken wand and the strange brass contraption, and they assumed an Oro squad must have passed through and left her there. Elara never returned to the front lines. Her leg healed with a permanent limp, and her wand hand never quite stopped shaking. The war ended 5 months later. The history books recorded the Battle of Upper Flagley as a minor skirmish, noting that refugee supply lines were successfully maintained thanks to improved long-range tactics. There was no mention of the girl on the roof. But in the years that followed, a rumor persisted in the darker corners of Nocturne Alley. Old Death Eaters, speaking in hushed tones over drinks, would talk about the ghost of the North. They warned new recruits to never fly in a straight line, and to never assume they were safe just because they couldn't see a wizard. They spoke of a judgment that came from nowhere, silent and inescapable. Elara Vance went back to a quiet life, working in the archives of the ministry. She was content to be overlooked. She was happy to be the quiet woman in the cardigan who brought tea to the meetings. But sometimes, when the younger Aurors would boast about their reflexes and their dueling speeds, she would just smile and look out the window at the distant towers. She knew the truth. She knew that while Gryffindors charged and Slytherins plotted, sometimes the thing that saves the castle is a Hufflepuff with a calculator and the patience to wait for the wind to change. If this forgotten legend of Hogwarts touched your heart, tell me in the comments, what would you have done in Elara's place? Like the video, share it with another Harry Potter fan, and subscribe to hear more hidden stories of courage, magic, and impossible odds. Sometimes the smallest spell is the one that saves the castle.